If you're a fan of the Foo Fighters or 90s grunge guitar tones, listen up. I've always been a massive fan of the Foo Fighters, and in particular, I've loved the sound of the guitar tones that were on their first record. They were very mid-forward, aggressive, buzzy, but they cut through the mix so well. And for a long time, no one knew what they used to get those tones. But it turns out that they were actually using a super rare, battery-powered amp that was made out of a gas can. Yeah, a gas can. Now, when I found that out, I went down this massive rabbit hole and knew that I had to get my hands on one so that I can model it to use in my own mixes. And that eventually led to me creating a new plugin with my company Carv Audio called the Gas Can Amp. It captures that gritty, mid-forward character of the original amp, but we've expanded on it to make it more usable inside of a modern-day mix. We've got an extended EQ range, and we also have added a gate to help get you more control. And although it's an amp, it's not just meant for guitars. It actually sounds great on vocals, drums, keys, or anything that needs a little bit of extra attitude. So if you want that sound inside of your DAW, visit carvaudio.com, and we've got a 14-day free trial so you can check it out inside of your own mixes. We also have some limited time special intro pricing that you'll want to check out for sure. So once again, that's the Gas Can Amp, and you can find it at carvaudio.com. Hey, welcome to the MasterYourMix podcast. My name is Mike Navina, and thank you for hanging out. Today, my guest is Bobbi Giel, and if you're not familiar with her, she is a mastering engineer based out of Nashville. She works out of a studio called Welcome to 1979, which is a really cool studio. A lot of analog stuff going on there. They do these really cool recording conferences during the year. They even do some recording directly to vinyl, which we get into in this episode. Bobbi's been there for a while now. She's now the head mastering engineer there, and she's worked with artists like Paramore, Luke Combs, Kalani, and a whole bunch of other great artists as well. And today we have a great conversation, largely centered around this idea of making sure that you're seeing the vision of an album come to life from beginning to end, like everything from the tracking stage to mixing to mastering. How does it all come together? And, where are things better fixed in tracking versus mixing versus mastering? And not only that, but also understanding your gear well enough that you can use your gear to your advantage to help fulfill that vision of your songs. And this is obviously really important, right? When you get to mastering, you tend to be fixing a lot of problems that people give you, but there's only so far you can take it, right? And if someone has dropped the ball in tracking or in a mix, what do you do, right? So in this conversation, we talk a lot about that process. And before getting into mastering, Bobbi had worked at studios doing the full production process. She's tracked things, she's mixed it. So she understands that whole process all the way through. So she comes at it with this really informed perspective. And I think it's really helpful for anyone listening to this, because even if you're not mastering music, there's a lot that we talk about here today that is absolutely going to apply to how you evaluate the music that you're recording or that you're mixing. And we get into things like understanding how things are going to translate, hearing things that get exposed in mastering that many mixing engineers or many tracking engineers don't even notice early on because they're not listening properly. They don't know what to be listening for. So there's certainly a lot that you can take from that part of our conversation. We also get into the recording to vinyl thing as well. So again, at her studio, they actually record directly to vinyl and they do it all in real time. So there's some really unique challenges that come along with that. So that's a fun part of our conversation as well. So if you're interested in how to make your recordings and mixes sound better, or how to make great masters, this is going to be a great interview for you. So with that said, let's just jump right into it. Bobbi Giel, thank you so much for being on the MasterYourMix podcast. How's it going today?
Good. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Doing well. For people who might not be familiar with you, can you give us a little background on who you are, what you do, and some of the projects you're working on these days?
Yeah, so I'm the head mastering engineer at Welcome to 1979 in Nashville. Most of the work that I do is in the vinyl world, so I do a lot of lacquer cutting and mastering specifically for vinyl, but I also do digital mastering as well for streaming and CD and all that. Yeah, some of the records that I've worked on, I did This Is Why by Paramore, Blue Water Road by Kalani. I cut a lot of movie soundtracks as well. I did Beetlejuice, the second one, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We do a lot of movie soundtracks here as well for vinyl. So
very cool.
Some of my favorites, some of the most notable, I think.
I would never think to get a soundtrack on vinyl, but I guess it's the same thing as getting any other genre of music, right?
I didn't think there was such a market for it, but then we've been doing a lot of work with Waxworks Records down in New Orleans, and that's what they specialize in. And they do some incredible disc artwork, and the album artwork is amazing, but that's their niche is movie soundtracks, specifically horror movie soundtracks, which I'm a horror movie I love horror movies. So to be able to do work on those and hear the soundtracks before movies come out in a lot of instances has been a lot of fun.
That's very cool. Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's so many little niches in this industry, and
There is, yeah.
yeah, if you find the right clients for it, you can keep busy with like some things you would never expect.
I know. No, I love it. That's one of the big things I like about mastering too, is that I was actually just having this conversation with somebody yesterday, but there's just such a market for so many different types of music. So when something comes in, I'm like, I never would have imagined that was something that people want to listen to, but it's really cool and it's different and I'm here for it. I love it.
Yeah, sometimes it gets a little weird, but yeah, you have
Yeah,
fun
no,
with
the weirder the better, honestly.
it. Yeah. So, how did you get into mastering and or just music production in general?
So I went to college for music production. I went to the Hartt School in Connecticut at the University of Hartford. And the what I loved about that program was that it was music based primarily, and then production was obviously the other component of it. Because I grew up as a musician. I was classically trained in piano. I did all the quintessential high school things, marching band, jazz band, concert band, all that stuff. And I knew that I wanted to work in music. I just didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. A lot of times, most of the career trajectories in music are music education or composition or performance. And I didn't really see myself in any of those roles. And so when I was in high school, I ended up taking a very, very beginner sound recording class at a high school or at my performing arts high school. And I realized that there were programs for that. And that was a path that I could take because I really liked being behind the board, being part of the creative process, but not necessarily in the center of it or the face of it, you should say. And so when I was looking at programs for college, I saw that there were a lot of music production programs up and down the East Coast, which is where I'm from originally. And yeah, so I got a degree in music production. But again, when I was in school, I loved every aspect of the production process. I liked recording, I liked mixing, I liked sound design. I even liked doing live sound. So I didn't really know where I wanted to land when I graduated. But my friend Adam Grover, who's actually a mastering engineer at Sterling, we went to college together. He was a few years ahead of me, and he got me into mastering because he was down here in Nashville at another mastering studio, Georgetown Masters, and he got me an internship there. I ended up working there as an assistant for a few years and kind of just fell into mastering through him and through various experiences. And yeah, now I'm working in vinyl for primarily, and it's been great. So yeah, it just kind of all falls into place, I think.
That's very cool. Was mastering on your radar when you were doing like the music production stuff? Because I feel like a lot of a lot of music production schools, at least the ones that I'm familiar with around here, like they tend not to talk about mastering too much. Like mastering exists, but like they're not teaching it as much as they are like being in the studio and recording bands and all doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, they're still not. I talked to a lot of programs. I've been back to Hartt multiple times and had conversations with students. So mastering wasn't on my radar. I think going into my senior year, I needed an internship. So I was just applying to anywhere and everywhere. And I reached out to Adam and I was like, I don't know what mastering is, but I need an internship and I wanted to try a new city because, like I said, I was born and raised in Connecticut, went to college. I wanted to branch out a little bit. So yeah, I was like, that's a great opportunity to learn it, for school. And I ended up just really, really enjoying it and clicking with it. But yeah, it's still not talked a lot about in school programs still. But it's nice because that gives students the opportunity to visit mastering studios or have master classes with mastering engineers, and we get to teach them from a real world experience. So it works out.
Very cool. So prior to getting into the mastering studio, like you were doing production work, if I'm not mistaken, like working at studios recording, and I think you even did post-production work as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Do you feel like in order to, like looking back at it now, like do you feel like going through that process of learning the full production process, like do you think that that was kind of almost like a prerequisite to getting into mastering? Or do you think someone these days could just jump into mastering?
I'm not sure I mean, you could just jump into mastering, but I think you'll be a better mastering engineer if you understand all the steps that apply to get to the mastering stage. Because a lot of times people think mastering is just slapping a limiter on something and making it louder and calling it a day, and it's not. And understanding, how the tracking process goes, how the mix process goes, what goes into mixing, what goes into tracking, really helps you create a better master in the end, whether it's for a streaming platform or for vinyl, because it really does start with the original tracking. I mean, there's only so much we can do as the last step in the production process as the mastering engineer to make a song stand out or an album stand out and play back as best as it can across whatever streaming platform or whatever way you're distributing your music. So to understand all the steps it takes and have a basic understanding of that and some experience in it, I definitely think it's helpful and needed.
Makes sense. You just mentioned something that I thought was a interesting thing to bring up, which was the idea of it starting at the tracking stage. And I'm curious to know, like, now that you've listened to so many tracks and you are familiar with this whole process from beginning to end, how many of the problems that you see being exposed in mastering are actually tracking issues versus mixing issues?
That's a good question. I think it's a good amount. I'd say it might be an even amount. I noticed it a lot in percussion and drums specifically, because when you don't get the sound of the snare and the sound of the kick drum that you want from the tracking stage, it's really hard to get it in the mix stage. And then by the time it gets to mastering, a lot of times we're bringing out things that you don't hear earlier on because we're making it louder. We're, isolating or adding clarity to the whole stereo track in general. And so I think a lot of times we make things more apparent than they are initially, if that makes sense. Same with guitars too, and even vocals. I mean, if a certain microphone is used on a vocal, that's going to be very apparent versus another microphone, and we can, to an extent, hear that up until the mastering stage. If it was a condenser mic or a dynamic mic used on vocals, however they decide to do it, it does make a difference, and we can hear it in those later stages. So yeah, I think it's just getting it as close to what you want as possible towards the beginning, as close as you can, I think really help make the final track what you want.
If you're a fan of the Master Your Mix podcast, you might not even know yet that we actually have a full website packed with a ton of resources designed to help you make better mixes. So head on over to MasterYourMix.com, and on there you're going to find free downloads, cheat sheets, blog articles, books, courses, and a whole bunch more, all designed to help simplify your mixing process, give you more clarity, and help you finish more music without second-guessing every move. And then, if you're looking for more personalized one-on-one help, where I can work directly with you on your tracks and walk you through the recording, editing, and mixing processes step by step, that's exactly what I work on inside of my coaching program, Amplitude. And you can learn more about that at masteryourmix.com/amplitude. And on that page, you can book a free call with me where we can talk through your current process, figure out where your gaps are, and identify the fastest ways to help you move forward with your tracks. And then if it makes sense to work together beyond that call, we can absolutely talk about that too. So once again, that's masteryourmix.com. And then for coaching, masteryourmix.com/amplitude. You'd mentioned that in mastering, often that's where, you're turning things up so you're hearing the issues more. Is that something that you would recommend to people that are tracking, just to help expose those issues a lot earlier? Or are there any other suggestions or any other common problems that I guess you maybe see that people can look out for in that tracking stage?
Yeah, I think maybe not even necessarily in the tracking stage, but the mixing stage. I know a lot of times most oftentimes mix engineers, they'll do what we call heated references, and they'll add, a compressor or a limiter on the back end to give the clients a sense of how it'll sound in the mastering stage. And I think that's a really good indicator of what could necessarily be a problem and what couldn't be a problem, especially on the mix side. But I think that's probably the best, just try to hear it as what it would sound like as a final product is probably the best advice I could give from the beginning. And just, you don't have to do like a 5-star master from the beginning. Just like, at since mastering has the reputation of just slapping a limiter on it, slap a limiter on it. Just see how that affects your mix, how that affects your tracking, and then we'll take care of the rest when it gets to us.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that, I agree with you. It's like, I always feel like people should be focusing on getting like the mix sound right from the source. But so many people kind of just are like, I'll fix it in the mix. And then, it's like, there's always passing the buck to the next stage, right? And it really paints people in a corner.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like when you're in the moment, whether you're a tracking engineer, mix engineer, mastering engineer, get it right from that point. Cause then the later steps, it's going to be easier, and it's just going to sound exponentially better.
For sure. Now, I feel like I've asked this question to a lot of different mastering engineers on the podcast, and I feel like there's two very different schools of thought when it comes to like mastering and your role. And so I'm curious to know, like, when it comes to, like, sometimes you hear something that you're like, oh, I wish that was fixed in the mix. And then there's other times where it's like, I could fix it in mastering. But like some people are afraid to go back to an artist and be like, hey, can we update the mix? It's going to be better somehow. Like, what's your school of thought with that?
That's a great question too. I kind of base it on the relationship that I have with the client. If it's a client that I've worked with before and we have a more casual relationship, I'm not as hesitant to go back and be like, hey, this kind of sounds problematic. What do you think? Or, hey, can you send me a new mix with the bass down, or, the vocal brought up in the chorus, something like that. If it's a newer client that I haven't worked with before and I hear something that I can't really fix on my end or attenuate for, I'll master it to the best of my ability of what I think works. And then when I send it, I'm like, hey, this is kind of my thought process. Let me know if you hear anything that might be of concern to you. Because at the end of the day, I mean, I am a creative person. Most mastering engineers are creative in their own right, and we're making creative decisions with what we're doing. But we're also being tasked to bring a track to life that the artist wants. And if they want something to sound a certain way that you might not necessarily agree with, it's not, we can give our opinion, but at the end of the day, it's their track. And if they like that, if they want to keep that, then we keep it. So it's just kind of having that back and forth relationship of respect and knowing when you can suggest something and when you're like, no, this is a flat out problem, we need to fix it. But a lot of times my thought process is I'll do it to the best of my ability, give my opinion, and then if they come back and they're like, no, I like it this way, that's it. We'll keep it that way.
Fair. So since we're kind of talking about almost this like preparation stage for mastering and you making sure that things come to you properly, do you have any advice as far as like how to best prepare a mix for the mastering stage?
Yeah. So the best thing, a lot of times when I'm asked what I would like to receive, I typically like to receive 24-bit or 32-bit WAV files at the native sample rate that the project was mixed at, because I want to work in the native sample rate as much as I can until I have to get to a point where now I'm converting for the different streaming services or however you're distributing your music. But then also I want the mix that was approved, that the client was hearing and that the client likes. Because a lot of times, mix engineers, they'll have, X amount of plugins on their master bus, and then they take all those out and send the mix. I'm like, but that's not what we were listening to. That's not what the client was listening to. That's not what they approved. Keep those on there. If you want to back off maybe the limiting that you added by a couple dB just to give me a little bit more headroom, that's great. I can always, level match where I need to, but I want the mix that was approved for mastering. And as far as headroom, I get that question a lot too. Like, people ask me, what's the required level to receive a mix at? And I'm like, whatever level you're comfortable with. Because my job is to get it to the level it needs to be for distribution, right? So you mix it to the level that you're comfortable with, that you like, and then I'll take care of the rest. So those are kind of the three biggest things, I think.
Sure. No, I agree with that. I feel like when people ask that question, it's like the people who mix quietly, it doesn't really matter for, but like it's the people that like slam it with the limiter.
Yeah.
That it's like, then it becomes an issue more because it's not so much that it's loud, it's that it's often being squashed. And
exactly.
so that's where it becomes an issue, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's when, I'll ask for the mix to work from. I'll ask them to, bring back that limiter a bit, but give me the version with the limiter as you printed it. And I'll use it as a heated reference, as I mentioned earlier. So just give me all like, if you have options, give me the options, but those are the two versions I would appreciate receiving.
For sure. That makes a lot of sense. So
Yeah.
then going into a new project, what's your typical mindset there? Or like what's your approach to starting a new mastering project?
So often, I mean, it changes. It changes based on if I'm cutting a record for vinyl or if I'm mastering for digital distribution. In terms of digital, if it's a new client that I'm working with, I always ask them for references that they were listening to while they were creating their record. Are there any artists that inspire them? Any particular sounds that they were aiming for, whether it was a specific sound like for the kick drum or the way the guitars are panned, just any type of information you can give me in terms of the sound you're going for. And then I always start out with a clean slate too. Like I don't have like a preset signal flow, I guess. I just like to start fresh cuz I work in a hybrid workflow as well. Like sometimes I'll, print analog, and then print back into my DAW and then put it through a digital limiter or compressor. Sometimes it's the opposite of that. So I always just try to start with a clean slate, take into account the references that they're giving me. If it's an artist that I've worked with before, I'll bring up the previous masters that we've worked on. Even if it's not the project it's not living with those previous masters, like it's not in the same album or anything, I still want their catalog to match in a way. So I'll reference those and get those to live in the same family. But then on the vinyl side, that also changes based on what kind of files I'm getting. Like if I'm getting files that were already mastered and they're prepped for vinyl, my process is just making sure that the music translates as best as it can onto the physical medium itself. So those changes tend to be global and they tend to be really minute and detailed. They're not egregious or anything drastic because it's just making sure the music fits well onto a lacquer. So it changes based on what I'm mastering for, but that's pretty much the gist of it.
And then as far as like processing goes, I know you said you don't really start with like a standard thing, but I guess signal flow wise, like what does a master typically consist of for you?
So I always start with, well, I'll gain it up just to a certain extent so I can hear the frequencies better. I'll mess with the gain staging later on to get it to exactly what I want, but just to be able to hear the frequencies I'm addressing, I just want to bring the level up. So I'll usually just do that first.
Similar to what we were just talking about with the tracking thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like I don't have a firm level yet. I'm not looking at like the LUFs or anything right now. I just want to get it to a point where I can hear the frequencies that I want to mess with, but loudly and present. So I'll do that, and then I usually start with an EQ. Sometimes I'll go through, we have a Manley massive passive. Sometimes I'll go through that. Sometimes I use a Fab Pro Q3 if I want to get a little bit more detailed. So I'll start with the EQ. I hardly ever boost frequencies. I almost always cut. And I do that because, I would say that's the like standard way to do it. I think we're always taught, even in school, it's like cut before you boost, cut before you boost. But I also know if I boost things, then I'm going to start boosting things all over the place and then it becomes a mess and then I get frustrated. So I just cut before I boost anything. If I'm hearing some sibilance, maybe I'll add a de-esser, a soft de-esser after my EQ. That is, sometimes people put the de-esser before the EQ. I tend to put it after because I've already done my EQ and I don't want to soften everything before I do the EQ because then it'll, I don't know, I think sometimes it might just get a little muddy or a little muted in those high frequencies. So I tend to de-ess after.
You're shaping the sound as like a whole overall first, and then you're getting into like the very nitty gritty with the de-essing afterwards.
Exactly, yeah. Yep.
Yep.
And then from there, that's when I'll start tweaking the gain staging. So I might lower the source clip, I might lower the input gain on my EQ, and then I'll start messing with the compressor, kind of getting it to the level that I want. And then from there, I might have to tweak the EQ a little bit more, because now I've got it to a level that I want. I have to go back and kind of shape the EQ a little bit more, because it is bringing out things that I didn't hear initially, or, I'm like, ooh, maybe I took a little bit out. Let me add a little bit more back in. So that's kind of my process in terms of mastering, is starting with EQ, then I get into the nitty gritty, and then I do the gain staging. And then once I have that, I'll go back to EQ and shape it up a little bit more, and then bounce out that reference master.
For sure. Now, I've often heard people talking about gain staging early on, just so that you're hitting certain analog gear, or even plugins for that matter, some analog modeled plugins at their kind of sweet spot.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that matters?
Yeah, I do. I mean, especially in mastering, like where you add your gain staging impacts how the overall sound is of your master. So if I'm getting most of my gain staging from my compressor, the color of that compressor is going to impact the master the most. Do I want that, or do I want more of a clean master? So I want the gain staging to happen more in my DAW, and then I add, maybe a couple dB on the compressors to give it a little bit of color. So it definitely, even on the tracking and mixing side, I definitely think it matters where your gain staging is, even on the individual instruments and vocals even.
Yeah, I found you're absolutely right. Like the color of the gear, even if it's plugins, like that
Yeah.
can drastically have an effect. So it's like you have to be mindful of it. I think a lot of people don't even think about it these days. It's
Yeah.
just like,
Yeah.
digital's clean, right? But like there's definitely been a lot of plugins that I've noticed that like will distort very easily if you send like certain levels to them. So it has to be on your radar at least.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point too, is, a lot of people focus on the gear, and it's like more gear is better, I guess. They're like, "Oh, look at all this gear I have," or "Look at all these plugins I have." But I think it's actually more important to understand the gear you're using, and understand what it's adding, or maybe what it's taking away from your mix or your master, and just really be comfortable with what you're using. Best is not necessarily more. More is not necessarily best. That's the saying I'm trying to say. But it's better to understand your gear inside and out, know how it affects your mixes and your masters, as opposed to just having endless options, because it's also decision fatigue, right? Like if you have too much to choose from, it just becomes overwhelming, at least for me.
For sure.
So
100%. Yeah,
yeah.
it's always funny whenever I look at people's mixes or masters, and it's like 30 different plugins, and it's like, why? You could do this with 3. It's
Yeah,
like you just have to
absolutely.
understand the tool really well. Even like
Absolutely.
even like a tool like FabFilter, you said that you use that. Like just the EQ alone has so many functions in there. Like you can
Yeah,
with the new version, you can bring in transformer settings and get different colors and stuff like that. And that's stuff people don't know about. Like a lot of people
exactly.
never look at those features. So, if you just take the time to learn it, you can really simplify things and really reduce the all that decision making fatigue, and not getting overwhelmed by like, what did I do on this plugin, or am I canceling out this decision? That kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. You mentioned that you often work as like a hybrid setup. What does that typically like? Where do you go to analog versus being in the digital world? Like what makes you decide to go one way or the other?
A lot of it's genre based for me. I tend to, if I want a warmer master for, say, an Americana record, or bluegrass, or like even some country pop records, if you just want a more homey, warmer record, I'll tend to go analog, because I find that I get more of that warmth through the analog gear. But if I'm looking at, a rock record, or a country record, or a pop record that just really needs to be punchy and big and clean and loud, then I'll mostly gravitate towards being in the box. So for me, it's more genre based. And again, even the references that clients give me, what sounds are they looking for? If, they're giving me, I had one record that they wanted it to sound like a Bruce Springsteen record. And I'm like, okay, so it's going to be loud, but it's going to be warm and it's going to have this like nostalgic sound to it. So I'm going to go towards analog. But then I also get artists that want more of a Megan Maroney sound, and she's modern and she's pop country, and so I'll tend to go more towards the DAWs and the plugins and stay in the box. So all just depends on the genre, what they're looking for.
Yeah. And you mentioned that sometimes you'll start with digital and then go to analog, or maybe even flip it around the other way. Like, are there certain tasks that you generally prefer to do digitally, like cleanup stuff, or yeah, what does that look like?
I tend to DS almost exclusively in the box just because there's so many different options with plugins and you can get really detailed where you need to be. Same with audio cleanup. I mean, that's another big part of mastering that I don't think many people realize is that we also do a quality control step where we go through and listen and we'll clean up any clicks or pops or like egregious distortions that take away from the listening experience, and that's easily done in the box as opposed to trying to do it through some outboard gear. But I also tend to prefer EQing in the box just because with an EQ like the Fab Q3, I can get really detailed as opposed to, using an outboard EQ. It's more detented. You don't really have as much flexibility. So I tend to prefer doing that in the box as well.
Which I guess both methods have their merit, right? It's like
Yeah,
sometimes
absolutely.
having the ability to do so much in FabFilter can also be just as detrimental if you're not careful with it, right? Whereas like an
Exactly.
analog
100%.
EQ, sometimes that limitation is actually a very positive thing because it forces you to just think about like, how does this actually sound right now, instead of like, can I
Yeah,
add all these extra notches, right?
absolutely. And it's funny you say that too, because when I started mastering, I was working primarily in digital. I didn't do any lacquer cutting or vinyl. That just wasn't, we didn't have a disc cutting lathe at the previous mastering studio I worked at. So it wasn't until I got to 79 that I started lacquer cutting. And that really made me understand my tools a lot better. And you are working within, I don't want to say limitations, but you have to consider a lot of different things and you have to stay within certain criteria in order to make a vinyl record work. So at this point you don't really have decision fatigue because there's only so much you can do and use. So that really just helps you understand your tools a lot better and gives you, I mean, it's helped my mastering go quicker too because I'm better able to pinpoint what it is I want to change and what tools I need to use to achieve that. So going back to how mastering originated, which was with lacquer cutting, really just helps you understand the whole evolution of it.
Sometimes giving yourself the challenge of like, I can only do X number of moves with my EQ. Like, so, giving yourself like
Yeah,
these limitations actually is a really positive thing, just in terms of getting better and understanding your gear and like realizing like how much you can get away with just little moves.
little changes. Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah. I feel like I recently got a Maslek EQ, which has always been on my radar. I've always loved them, but using it has made me realize like how much like I probably overdid it in like FabFilter or something like that. It's like you're like, oh, like this
Yeah.
just a shelf EQ does all I need. Great, like
Yeah. I mean, even when I was first starting, like I always thought, I had to do so much to make something sound the way I want it to sound. Like I had to have like 10 when I was mixing in college, I had to have like 10 plugins on one strip to make, my electric guitar sound gritty. Like when really all you needed was a good guitar player, the amp mic'd properly and maybe a couple plugins to shape the sound and you've got what you want. So the older the more experience you get, the older you get, the more ease that comes with everything. But yeah, when you're first starting out, it's just you're just piling things on and it's like, no, we can strip all that out. You really only need like one or two and we're good.
totally. Yeah, I often think that when people talk about that analog versus digital debate, it's not that the analog gear sounds better necessarily. It's just
Hmm.
it forces you into a workflow that sometimes ends up making the results better because you're limited by the gear
Right.
you have available to you. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's all preference. I mean, I get asked that question because I work in vinyl. I get asked that question all the time, which one is better, analog or digital? And I'm like, there's not one that's better over the other. It's one, it's preference. What do you want to use? What do you think will sound best on your music? And also it's just different style of workflow. And which one are you more comfortable with? Which one do you think will merit the best final outcome? But not one is better over the other.
For sure. And it's not like even the end listener does not care at all. Like it's not like they're like,
No.
oh, they use like a Neve on this or whatever. It's like, no,
No.
they don't
They
care.
don't care.
Does it sound good or not, right? Like
Exactly. Does it sound good? Great.
most engineers don't even care when they're listening to music. It's just like, does it sound good? Yes or no? Cool. Move on, And
Yeah.
the curious will dig in, I guess, but as a listener of the music, which is the job of a mastering engineer, like create something that is listenable and enjoyable. Like as long as you achieve that, then who cares what was used?
That's how I see it. And I've never really been a gearhead, even whether it's analog gear or plugins. I've never really been someone that could talk hours about gear because I rather just understand thoroughly how a piece of gear works as opposed to knowing the latest gear or you know like having different versions of the same compressor or EQ. It's just never really been of interest to me. I rather just really know how to use my gear and how to use it to the best of my ability to make something sound good. Because at the end of the day, like you said, like we're all enjoyers of music. I was a musician growing up at first, so first and foremost, it's just making sure what I create at the end of the day is enjoyable for people to listen to.
Now, in terms of your process, I've heard you say before that you typically like to monitor at similar levels every time you're mastering. Is that true?
Yeah, so it again, it depends on if I'm mastering digital or analog. Usually, or not analog, but for vinyl. Usually I'll actually listen a little quieter when I'm cutting for a vinyl record because vinyl records are inherently quieter than digital releases. So I tend to listen maybe like 3 to 5 dB quieter than what I would listen to when I'm mastering for a digital release. But again, it would also change if I'm, mastering for a certain level. Like if I'm mastering for, you know, a pop record that is going to sit around -9 LUFS integrated with like peaks at like -7, I'm probably going to listen to that a little quieter than if I'm mastering something to like -11, -10, because it's just inherently going to be louder and my ears are going to get tired after, 10, 15 minutes. So to save that, I'll do most of my listening a little quieter. So yeah, I try to keep it as consistent as I can, but it does change based on what I'm working on.
Yeah. And as far as determining how loud you should listen, like do you have like I know some people will have like markers or like preset volumes
Yeah.
that they go to. Like are you the same way or is it just kind of like whatever feels like comfortable?
Whatever feels comfortable, but I do use a dangerous monitoring system, and so I do have certain notches marked for where I typically listen, depending on what I'm working on. But I'm flexible, which I don't know if it is the best thing to admit, but yeah, usually when I'm mastering for a digital release, it's about 2 notches louder than when I'm mastering for a vinyl release, if that gives anybody any indication.
I get it. Like I'm looking at my monitor controller right now and I just got like tape with markings on it of
Yeah,
like
like I
how,
have like
you
little
know,
markings on
yeah.
it.
I've
It
got like
works.
my a mix should be at this level, a master listening at this level, like kind of just
Yeah.
keeping things like in line. I know what that sounds like to my ears and it's comfortable. So
Yep.
I know what the frequency balance should be like at those levels. So
Yeah.
I think yeah,
I'm the
I
same.
guess I was kind of as far as like listening at different levels, do you feel like you hear certain things better at loud levels versus quieter levels?
Yeah, so obviously sibilance, we're gonna hear a lot. It's gonna be a lot more prevalent at a louder level. So if I think something is sibilant, I might turn the level up just to see if that's really true or if my ears are just playing tricks on me. And then if it is, then I'll tweak the de-essing a little bit more. And then distortion is actually more prevalent when it's quieter. So if I'm hearing some low end distortion in like the bass or the drum, just something that sounds really gritty, I might turn that down a little bit to see if I'm still hearing that, or again, if it's just my ears playing tricks on me, because sometimes they do that too. But yeah, distortion is actually much easier to hear at lower levels than it is at louder levels, which I feel like is a lot of, you know, the reasoning behind consumers don't really hear when distortion happens because they're listening pretty loudly, whether it's on their headphones or in the car. So, different things to take into consideration when you're listening at different levels.
For sure. Now, I guess on this topic of levels, like it's impacting how we hear the balance of everything. And the better you know your gear, which seems to be like a little bit of a theme here today. It's like,
Yeah, a little
understanding
bit.
the gear, understanding the levels, like the better you understand what you should be hearing out of your speakers at certain levels, like the easier translation gets. And you mentioned something earlier that I thought was interesting was you'll often ask a band like kind of what are their influences and get a sense of like what they're going for. And there's so many different artists out there, different balances, different mixes that exist. So it's not like there's one consistent amount of like you need this much bass, or like that much
Right.
this much mids or whatever, because it's going to vary. So in terms of trusting that something is going to translate, like how do you go about doing that? What's your process there?
So a lot of times I'll when I get to a master that I think is where I want it to be, I might pull up the song that I was referencing on like Tidal, just so in like A B between the two and see like, does this match up to what I'm hearing on Tidal? Because Tidal will play back, at the highest resolution that they received. So if it's matching or if it's kind of, if both songs can exist together on a playlist and sound smooth between the two, then I think I've achieved my job. Sometimes I'll also take it into my car and, if I have time, I'll take a master into my car and I'll listen to it because I have a Honda HR-V. Like I have a very standard car that many people have, or they have some variant of it. So if it sounds good in my car or it sounds like, it's listenable in my car, then I also think that it will translate well in other people's cars. So just taking it into like real life instances, listen to something off of Spotify and see if the master that you created holds up to something on Spotify, or holds up to how you listen to in a car or on your record player. I'll get a test pressing when a client wants me to approve it, and I'll take it to my house because I have a middle tier record player with bookshelf speakers. Nothing crazy, nothing fancy. So that's the best way I think, to audition things if you want to hear it how average consumer will hear it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I
Mhm.
feel like the reference is like I've talked about it many times on the podcast, and I just think that they're the easiest way to know if you're in the right ballpark. But
Yeah.
but all these artists are like, oh, I'm so unique. My music doesn't sound like anything else. It's like, no, come on. Your music sounds like a lot of things that you're just not willing to admit.
Yeah. Like but that's also the beauty of music, is like everything is derivative, but things can also still sound fresh, but you don't have to, like, don't be ashamed that it might be derivative of something, because it's great that you're taking influences from other artists, but there's still ways for it to sound fresh and new. But yeah, everything's derivative. Everything is going to have some type of influence from somebody else, and that's nothing to be ashamed of or to stray away from.
Yeah, it's not like you're trying to like literally clone another artist. It's like
No,
you have your
absolutely.
influences. You've listened to music all your life. Of course, you're influenced by certain sounds.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and it's like sometimes I'll ask people like, after you listen to your music, who's the next artist you're going to listen to on your stereo? And it's like, that's probably going to give you a good idea of what
Yeah,
they're going to be comparing your mix to, right? Or the master to.
exactly. Yeah, no, that's a great comparison, actually.
Because yeah, otherwise like everyone has it, but I hear that all the time. Like, I can't listen to references. I can't find anything that sounds like my music. It's like, there's something.
There's something.
You're always comparing.
You're always comparing. Just don't even tell me your reference. Just tell me an artist that you like, because I can guarantee that I will find something in your music that relates to that artist, because you're gonna have some influence from them one way or the other, and it's not a bad thing. It's art. It's music. That's what it's been doing for thousands of years.
Yeah, of course. You'd mentioned that you do a lot of vinyl cutting. Is that something that you learned or that you started doing once you came to Welcome to 79?
Yeah, so that's I learned it exclusively at 79, because not every mastering studio has a disc cutting lathe, and when I was at Georgetown, they didn't have one. So we would prep masters for vinyl, but we didn't have a disc cutting lathe at that studio. So it wasn't until I came to 79 that I started learning how to cut and what went into lacquer cutting and vinyl mastering. And so that's probably about, I mean, at least half, if not 60% of the work that we do is exclusively lacquer cutting for vinyl releases.
Very cool. So it's interesting because you mentioned that you were working in a place that didn't have a lathe and you were still prepping for mastering or for vinyl. Now that I guess when you look back, how were you preparing back then differently than what you would do now?
So back when I was doing it back at my original studio where I was at originally, it was mostly just bringing the level down in a certain amount of dB to them, and then also getting each side sequenced and having one continuous wave file for each side, and then just bringing the level down and maybe de-essing a little bit extra just for some of those more pesky sibilants. So that was kind of the extent of what I was doing earlier on. But then when I started cutting, I was like, oh, so it's not just bringing the level down, like it's also easing up on the compression as a whole, because compression, the more compressed the audio is, the quieter the record's actually going to be, because a record likes dynamics. A record wants to be able to get really loud and open up the land between the grooves, so that space between each groove. The louder something is, that's going to expand. The quieter something is, that's going to condense, and you're going to have less space. But when something's compressed, that land between each groove becomes more consistent. It's not condensing, it's not expanding. And so to be able to fit everything onto one side without that expanding and condensing, we have to drop the level. So something that's exponentially compressed is going to be quieter on a record as opposed to being louder. And that wasn't something I really understood until I started cutting, because I can physically see it happening. So I think that was the biggest eye opener when I started cutting full time.
That's very cool. Yeah, I was just curious because not a lot of people have lathes and they still want to have masters or make masters at home that could still work. So, it's just like understanding more about what are those little details that you should be paying attention to that you maybe haven't yet.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of my job too, is just educating people on vinyl, because vinyl was the original way that people listened. So everything was sequenced, recorded, mixed exclusively to be on a vinyl record. But now we have so many different options to listen to our music on. Vinyl becomes kind of a secondary option. And so a lot of times it's having to educate why something that you mastered for a digital release won't necessarily translate the same well on vinyl. And then having to just explain it and give your professional opinion on what could work, what won't work. So that's a lot of the job too.
And do you typically find yourself when most projects that are being done on vinyl are still also going to get a digital release? So do you find yourself making either a vinyl master first and then going digital, or maybe the other way around?
It depends on the files I'm getting. A lot of times I'm cutting masters, or I'm cutting records that were already mastered. And so they're not necessarily paying for a separate vinyl master, because in that case, I would take the original source mixes and do a whole remaster. A lot of times I'm just getting the files that were prepped for vinyl from the mastering engineer, which, in most instances was just the level brought down a little bit, the files prepped, one for A side, one for B side, and maybe a little extra de-essing. So in the instances where I'm actually mastering a project for both digital and vinyl releases, I'll usually start with the digital master first, just because that's going to be the primary way people are going to listen. And then when I move to the vinyl master, I'll use the digital as a blueprint. I'll keep all the EQ the same for the most part, even the compression, but I'm going to dial the compression back significantly and then just do some overall tonal shaping to fit the lacquer better. So I use the digital masters more as like a blueprint for the vinyl because I want them to still be relatively the same. You know, they're going to sound as close to each other as they can, but because vinyl is a physical medium, it's never going to sound exactly the same. So it really just depends on what process in the mastering step that I'm in, whether I'm just doing the lacquer cutting or if I'm also doing a full remaster for vinyl or if I'm doing the digital and the vinyl master. It changes based on the needs of the artist.
It's almost kind of like undoing the digital master to some degree, but I mean, doing it informed, not just like, you know, removing a limiter, like we talked about with the mixing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now at your studio, I know you guys do like recording summits and stuff like that, where you guys are actually, like, if I'm not mistaken, recording directly to vinyl, right?
Yep.
How does that work?
So it's a lot of fun. It's very nerve-wracking. So basically how it works is we'll have a band or an artist come in and they'll basically be coming in for like a mix session or a tracking session. And everything's getting mixed in real time on the console, on the mix console that we have. And then I'll take a 2-track, or they'll send me a stereo out of the console and we'll go directly into my outboard gear of my console, my mastering console. And then I'll do some mastering on my end. It never hits any digital processing. So I'm usually all exclusively outboard gear. And then once I've done that, then it hits my lathe. And so really as soon as you know, the artist is strumming a guitar, that guitar strum hits my lathe within a second. And it's
not only hit your lathe, it's gone through the mixing stage and your mastering stage.
Everything. Yep.
Okay, cool.
All analog signal. Yep.
So I imagine that there's a lot of prep work and sound checking ahead of time to make sure that you've got some decent EQ and stuff in the mixing stage, and then it's coming to you from a mastered perspective, you know, and making sure that your mastering tastes good.
Yeah, so it's really fun actually, because like they'll get their sounds in there, they'll shape all the tones that they want for all the different instruments, the vocal, everything. And then Chris, our studio owner who also does the direct-to-discs on the mixing side, he'll get a stereo mix going off of the console. And that's kind of where my position starts to play in, because I'm like, hey, can you give me less of what you're pumping through that stereo mix, because I want to be able to have more flexibility on my end to gain things up if I need to. So then I'll get a mix feeding to me that is at a good level, and then I have wiggle room to EQ, to add compression, to do what I need to do on the mastering side, and then to get, you know, a decent sounding cut. So there is a lot of prep work. We also will probably do like 1 or 2 songs fully as like a test cut to hear how it sounds on a piece of scrap lacquer. And so, and I'll usually ask them to play like their most dynamic track, their most, you know, maybe dense track too, with as much instrumentation, as loud as the vocals are going to get, just so I can get an idea of where I can push my gear if I need to, or where I need to, you know, bring things down and attenuate for. So there's a lot of prep work that goes into it.
Yeah, but it actually sounds like you are still kind of like it's its own separate mastering stage. Like you're letting them figure out the mix first, and then it's coming to you, and then it just happens kind of simultaneously. But yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah, and then a lot of times too, like it kind of emulates like mastering in the digital world, because sometimes, like we mentioned earlier in our conversation, like I'll get a mix that I'm like, this might be problematic, and I'll send it back being like, hey, can you print a new mix with this adjusted? Whereas when we're doing a direct to disc, I can be like, hey, I can't really fix the sibilance here. Like, can you DS on your end? Like, do some side chaining to catch some of these harsh cymbal hits or DS, and then so it feeds back to me and doesn't sound splatty on my lacquer cut. So it like almost emulates that same dynamic and that same conversation that we might have on, mastering for a digital on a digital side of things.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Aside from obviously not being able to mess up while it's live,
Yeah.
obviously it puts a lot of pressure on you. Are there any other differences that you find yourself doing when you're recording directly to vinyl versus if you had time to like manipulate things?
Yeah, a lot of times I'm pretty much like I'm trying to make sure that the low end, because low end takes up more space on a record as opposed to higher frequencies, because we're recording live and I only have a finite amount of space on my record, I want to make sure that the low end isn't too boomy or too big so it doesn't take up as much space. So I'll really hone in on that and sculpt that on my end. It's usually already pretty tight when it comes to me off the board, but I'll even tighten it a little bit more on my end. So that's probably one of the biggest things I'm looking at. And same with just overall level as well. Because again, I can't, because I don't have something looking ahead and telling me, hey, we have a loud section coming up, let's open the groove up. Oh no, now it's quiet, let's condense it. I just have a fixed pitch on my, how the grooves are cutting. I have to make sure my overall level is much more consistent and the side lengths are a little shorter in order to make sure everything fits and, sounds good at the end.
For sure. I'm also guessing that there's some math involved too, and understanding like, okay, we've got these songs that are roughly this long. We could fit, X amount on the vinyl. So you're already kind of mapping out to some degree, like how wide you can go with your grooves and all that too, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, it's definitely, I could see how that would be very stressful in the moment, but also very fun and rewarding.
It is. And a lot of times once we explain it to the artist who's doing it, and we try to tell them, hey, like 4 songs per side, 16 minutes, like let's keep it at 16 to 17 minutes per side, because, a record that's not cut live, they can be upwards of 20 minutes, 22 minutes, but that's because we have the flexibility to have the grooves condense and expand more accurately, whereas with a live record, we don't have that ability. So in order to still get a live or a loud cut and, a good sounding record, we just tell the clients, hey, 16 minutes, 4 songs, like, keep it short, keep it safe. But yeah, at the end of the day, like it's rewarding and the artist walks away with a really, all the artists I've worked with and they've walked away from it, they're like, that is the coolest experience I've ever done. And it just amplifies and exemplifies their artistry and like how good they are as artists, because they went through this whole 16 minutes without any, they're not fumbling, they're playing live like a show, and it's recorded onto this physical medium forever, and they feel really accomplished, and it's really rewarding to see them enjoy it and to see them really, really love it.
It's very cool. Yeah, I think even from like the typical problem with production is that like you go into a studio, you record the song, and then you're waiting however long for someone to edit it or mix it and master it. And it's like that initial excitement of just being in the studio kind of wears off at some point, and you're just like getting impatient and ready to hear it. Whereas like this is like you just got off a high of performing, and then it like literally here you go, it's done.
There you go. Yep. Yeah, no, it's great. And like, and you just get such raw performances out of it too. It just gets emotional, and it really brings me back to when I was playing music and, growing up as a musician. And it just really reminds me of how much I just love music and the environment of music and what it does for people. And so being able to, get it onto a vinyl record that can get pressed and people will enjoy is very rewarding.
That's very cool. I love that. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I do have a question for you. Like at the end of the day, in your mind, what ultimately makes a great sounding master?
That's a question. I think just an understanding of what the music is and what the artist is trying to accomplish, and understanding where the drive of the song is coming from. Like sometimes the drive is from the rhythm section, from a piano, or a guitar riff, or a guitar is leading the whole track. So just understanding like what is driving the song and how to best bring that across the finish line and translate across all the different distribution platforms is probably what's going to make or break a song, whether it's honestly from the master or from the mix, because our masters and our mixes are only as good as the song itself. And so if we can bring out the best of the song, I think we've done the best job we can do.
Fair. And it goes back to what you talked about earlier about just making sure that even at the tracking level, it's still preserving or getting the best out of that song and preserving all of the things you just talked about there.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Love it. This has been awesome. I've really loved learning more about your process. If people want to learn more about you or maybe even work with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I pretty much have every social media platform you could think of, and my name is my handle's the same on everything. It's just my name, Bobbi Giel. And then if you want to work with me, my email address is on our studio's website. You just go to the mastering section on the website and all of our information's there. I'm pretty easily accessible through there, and I'll, answer with any questions or comments you have. And I'm a millennial. I have pretty much every social media platform you can think of. It's like pretty annoying.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, Bobbi, thank you again for taking the time to do this. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. This was great. I appreciate you having me.
So that was my interview with Bobbi Giel, and I loved learning more about how they do things at the studio she works out of. It was cool to learn about the recording directly to vinyl thing, because that would be a really unique experience as an artist to be able to just like play your instrument and literally have your record done right afterwards. I think that's really cool. But also from the engineering side of things, I appreciate all of the prep work that goes into that to making sure that it actually can run smoothly. And the process of cutting vinyl, it can be pretty stressful as it is. So to add that layer of doing things in real time and not being able to mess up in the moment, it's just really fascinating. So I really enjoyed learning more about that. I also thought it was really interesting to learn more about Bobbi's perspective on the issues that she typically hears in mastering and how to take care of that earlier on. And I thought she shared some really great tips as far as paying attention to your listening levels or applying limiting to your mixes or to your tracking stage so that you can hear those fine details that a mastering engineer ultimately will hear. Whether you keep those in the final mix or not, that doesn't really matter, but it's about being prepared and understanding what the next person in line in the process is going to hear or be looking out for. So the more you can inform your decisions early on, the smoother the whole process is going to be, right? And it's all about fulfilling that vision of the artist. And I thought that even the way Bobbi talked about choosing the gear that she uses in the mastering stage and how she knows when she's going to go with something analog versus digital or even a hybrid approach, I thought that was really interesting too, to learn more about her decision-making process with that. But yeah, at the end of the day, like, we're all artists trying to get the sound that we want. We want to make sure that our mixes sound good. We want to make sure our masters translate and that people can enjoy it. And that ultimately, as an artist, that ultimately our vision for our music, what we heard in our head is coming out of the speakers. So the more we can focus on that right from the earlier stages, the better our production is going to be. Now, with all of that said, a lot of people get stuck in those early stages because they don't know what to be doing. They don't know how to set up their mics properly. They don't know what to be listening for, how to gain stage properly, how to choose the right equipment, all that kind of stuff. And then to take it a step further, sure, even if you get stuff recorded into the box, what do you do with it in the mixing stage, right? And a lot of people get very overwhelmed in that stage too. If you would like one-on-one help with that, if you want someone that can watch over your shoulder and give you a repeatable process for making decisions along the way and knowing what to do during tracking, editing, mixing, mastering, and making sure that you're implementing everything properly while giving you feedback and guiding you through the entire process. That is exactly what I work on with my students inside of my coaching program, Amplitude. And in that program, I'm working one-on-one with you. We're hopping on calls. We're opening up mixes. We're looking at pictures of your tracking setup. We're like literally going through this together to make sure that the vision you have for your music gets executed properly. And I'm there at all points of the process to make sure you're getting your questions answered and to give you a complete workflow rather than trying to pick together little ideas off of YouTube and hope that they work together, right? So instead, I'm giving you my whole beginning to end system for this stuff. So if that seems like something you'd be interested in, make sure to check out MasterYourMix.com/amplitude. And on that page, there's a link where you can book a free call with me. I'd love to learn more about your music. I'd love to know more about your process and see where you might be going wrong, what areas you need to focus your energy on so that you can see the fastest wins and get the best results. And if I can help you, we'll talk about that. If I can't, no worries. Like, I only work with people inside of my program who I truly believe I can help. So if you're interested in chatting and getting some direction in terms of where to put your focus, make sure to check out MasterYourMix.com/amplitude. And with that said, we've reached the end of this episode. Thank you so much for sticking around, and I can't wait to chat with you in the next one. We'll talk soon. Have a good one. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. Please make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave a review. If you have any questions or comments for the podcast, send an email to questions@masteryourmix.com. And for more information on how to create pro recordings from your home studio, visit MasterYourMix.com.